Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of the Lashing Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. My name is Jared Brewer. I'm joined by my good friend and co-host Kevin Quigley. Kevin, Penn State got beat by Oregon. They got beat by 8 points, and there was a lot of meat left on the bones for the Nittany Lions throughout the course of Saturday night's Big Ten championship game against the Oregon Ducks. First and foremost, you got to give credit where it's due for Dan Lanning and his team. Dylan Gabriel played a great game. Tez Johnson is an incredible wide receiver. But Penn State could have beat Oregon. Fortunately, or fortunately for them, they didn't. And we'll talk a little bit about that later in the show. But Penn State proved that they can play with the big dogs and did so in a big way on Saturday night.
Yeah, and you say Oregon beat Penn State. I'd argue Penn State beat themselves. The two face masks, take it or leave it, hustle plays, especially the Tony Rojas one inside on a very critical play, gifting Oregon first downs left and right. And then the kickoff return, personal foul, I think was it Zion Tracy or DeJuan Lane, I forget who it was, swinging on the return on the one of the return guys for Oregon. Barely caught that on the edge of the camera. Looked like just a hand battle. I don't know. Take it or leave it. I'm not a fan of that penalty. It's a high stakes game. Very a lot of passion going on. And then the Vega personal foul, getting up, like didn't need to punch the guy in the side of the head to get up off the ground. Oregon was more poised. They were under control, and I think it's been the theme for Penn State this year is they come out. They're not necessarily poised. They're not under control. The defense was they were flying, a little misguided early, but they were flying. And yeah, but if you look at the game after it settled in, Penn State was there. Penn State had every chance, I don't want to say to win, but they showed that they belong. They dug themselves a massive hole early, which they were never going to overcome. There was hope there. I mean, I was rooting for it, really getting amped up. But Penn State shows that they belong. They showed that they can go toe-to-toe with the number one team in the country, and if they don't turn over the ball 2 times, and they don't inflict 60 yards of penalties on the first four drives against themselves, they win this ball game.
Without a doubt. And you're 100% right. And I think the other thing, too, is Oregon didn't miss. Man, they played a flawless game. I mean, every time that Penn State was nearly getting to Dylan Gabriel through many holds, let's be real. That part of it is tough to swallow. I think if you're a Penn Stater, because there was a lot of meat. There was a lot of meat left on those bones too. I mean, you had so many different opportunities to make a play, but Abdul Carter's jersey is being held, or Denied Dennis Sutton is being held, or whoever, and it is what it is. But again, despite all of that, Penn State still played well enough to be in the hunt late in the game. They were driving as Drew Aller threw his second interception, another crippling one. The one to Khalil Dinkins was brutal there in the second quarter, and that set them up nicely to go up 28-10. If they don't get that, potentially Penn State turns that into points. But at the very least, they don't get those. Oregon doesn't score there, and it's a completely different game for the remainder of the contest. But for Penn State to play as bad as they did at times, to play as good as they did at times, and yet walk away with only an 8-point loss, Penn State proved they can play. But there's still a lot of football left for the Nittany Lions.
Yeah, Oregon scores 3 touchdowns with their first 3 possessions. Penn State takes it down the field, goes field goal to match the first touchdown, but 8-play, 59-yard drive. You weren't listening to the CBS coverage. Most of us were listening to the CBS coverage, and it was embarrassing. Danielson was talking about how Penn State's defense was the worst thing he's ever seen. In much more elaborate words, completely ignoring the fact that Oregon's defense was just as porous as Penn State's was. And it's not like Oregon was out there making plays or making stops. The only stop that Oregon got on the first 3 drives was as a result of the 15-yard personal foul call.
Mm-hmm.
Oregon scored on their first 3 touchdowns. All 3 of those drives had a 15-yard personal foul call against Penn
That extended
State.
the drive, yeah.
2 of them extended the drives, and 1 of them puts them at the 40 instead of the 25. The other 2 drives will ignore the 1-for-1 for a touchdown that you mentioned after the interception return. Both of them 3 and outs. Oregon didn't. They stalled out on the offense, and then Penn State goes into prevent defense to end the half. After Penn State goes down 28-10, they outscore Oregon 27-17. They outgained them by 65 yards yesterday. It was 518 to 466. This team can play.
Go ahead.
The team can play.
Right.
They flat out played.
They did not start very well. Penn State was very undisciplined and very out of position many times early in that game, and it showed. And it showed on that first drive in a big way. And that Oregon team is fast. They move incredibly fast. It felt like we were watching a track meet in the press box, and it was just one of those games. But again, they matched up so incredibly well with them. You know, they still ended up with 518 yards. 226 of those were through the air. Drew Aller threw 3 touchdowns. If he doesn't throw those 3 picks, we're talking about him, or those 2 picks, we're talking about him probably. He's probably getting some looks as the MVP, to be perfectly honest with you. They ran for 292 yards. Both Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton ran for over 100 yards in the first, and that's the first time they did that since they played Kent State at the beginning, Kent State at the beginning of the year. Or no, Bowling Green. I'm sorry. Whoever the second game of the season was, it's been a long day. But yeah, I mean, they proved that they can play. The defense, man, every time Dylan Gabriel was under pressure, he just was able to miraculously get that ball out and away from him, and usually found Tez Johnson.
Aided significantly by offensive holding or offensive pass interference.
Yeah, and they didn't run the ball really impressively. But Tez Johnson, man, he was there whenever they needed him. He had 11 receptions for 181 yards and a touchdown, 11 catches on 12 targets. That's a pretty damn impressive night for a receiver.
Yeah, and it's you and I have talked a couple times this season, and we're never ones to blame officiating. However, when it's that bad and games are that close, when the game is 3.5 point spread from Vegas, and then you put those teams on the field and they start just throwing haymakers at each other, you need grade A officiating, and it needs to be even, it needs to be balanced, and there needs to be zero bias at all. Not saying that the fix is in, but my goodness, the blatant holding calls, the OPI on 4th and 2, which basically is the back-breaking touchdown of the game, just not called. This I hate, and I texted you in the game this. I hate the let them play games. Football is a game of rules. It is about fairness. It is about equitable chances to catch the ball. It is equitable chances to tackle opponents. Blocking is legal, but you can't grab them and you can't push off. And every time that was happening on a critical play, the referees swallowed their whistles, and it was so infuriating to watch. Zion Tracy made that tackle for loss with the defender on his back, giving him a piggyback ride to the backfield, and the referees still don't call a holding call. What do you need to do? And somebody on Twitter said this, and I think it's perfect. James Franklin needed to eat that fine last night and just go after the Big Ten, because it's not just a Penn State problem. It is a college football-wide problem, especially in the Big Ten. You got to eat. Just somebody needs to step up and say, this is getting out of hand. And granted, Big Ten's known as the physical conference. There's 6 flags last night, 8 flags last night. Set the tone.
A total of 8. Oregon had 3 for 24 yards.
And Penn State goes 5 for 65. 4 of those are personal fouls. And then they had, what was the 5-yard? Was it a false start? Yes, It was a false start. They announced the wrong number, which had me lit up because they called it on 66, ends up being on 77. Right guard versus left tackle.
Yeah.
And they circle the left tackle on the screen. And it's like, that guy didn't false start. Where are we getting this from? Finally, the replay comes out. It's the right guard that's false starting. But how does Penn State commit 4 personal fouls in the first 4 drives of the game and then doesn't commit but one more obvious false start penalty the rest of the way? Like, no team plays that clean, Penn State especially, but I don't know. In games that matter this much, and you don't want officials dominating the game, but you also don't want the lack of officiating dominating the game. And I feel that's what happened on Saturday night.
And the other thing too is, I mean, you go back to that reception on the sideline there for Omari Evans, and I mean that's a problem. Like that ball, and so for me, you as somebody that does that for a job, like I am the replay assistant at an NEC replay assistant at St. Francis. That is a play you have to call down to the officials and get their attention and be like, hey, you need to review this. Like you need to take a look at this. And they used to not even have that review was really bizarre.
Especially since it's one drive after they do the expedited review for Oregon.
Right. And it's just like, so those things obviously, but it's not even just the Big Ten that had these issues. Both the SEC championship was marred by officiating problems, and so was the ACC championship. And listen, they should never be the story in a game of those magnitudes. But regardless of all that, Penn State still found themselves within a score and 2-point conversion of tying the game late. And despite, again, all of that, despite the loss, despite coming up short, they are still in a really good spot in the college football playoff. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more here when we come back for the second segment of the Lashing Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. Welcome back to the second segment of the Lashing Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. He's Kevin. I'm Jared. Kevin, Penn State lost. Welcome back to the second segment of the Lasching Out Podcast on the Sports Now Network for our YouTube viewers. Sorry for the technical difficulties. For those listening on Transistor, welcome to the second segment. Kevin, Penn State lost. But, and this is a very weird but, because this is probably the weirdest game as far as ramifications go. Like in 2016, Penn State was a win and they were in the football playoff. Everybody thought, right? The top 4 teams, but that wasn't the case. They got knocked out for Ohio State, who they beat. Now, Penn State's in the playoff. They got a home game, and they're ahead of Ohio State, which is a nice little twist and irony given the circumstances. But for Penn State, they have a really, really good path to get to where they want to go, and that is the national championship.
Yeah, and I love how the committee handled everything. If you played your conference championship game and you were in position to make the playoff, you were not penalized for playing your conference championship game.
And that's how it has to be. Because if you would have punished an SMU, let's use SMU, for example, the beloved Mustangs, right? If you knock them out and you keep Alabama in there, why would you ever play a conference championship game again?
Exactly. So I love that they kept the integrity of the conference championship games, because we had Arizona State, Iowa State, probably not the best conference title game. Boise State, UNLV on Friday night was really good. Georgia, Texas was a nail biter in a very low scoring fashion. I think the SEC and Big Ten conference switched championship games.
Thought, yes, that's how I thought the Big Ten was going to go, and they ended up having their rules reversed.
But I love that Texas stayed ranked above Penn State for both losing the conference title games, but Notre Dame was not able to jump them. Texas finishes the season number 3. Penn State finishes the season number 4. Notre Dame's sitting there looking in at number 5. Ohio State number 6. Georgia obviously jumps to number 2, as they should, for winning that game against Texas. So really like the way the bracket has shaped up. Penn State has you mentioned it. That's kind of what you threw me here for, but Penn State has a very favorable route to the semifinals. The SMU matchup, I think they're opening as 9.5-point favorites. Granted, the game's 2 weeks away. But I think it's a very winnable game. The ACC championship game surprised me. SMU showed a lot of grit. Clemson's offense definitely surprised me. I do believe I used the term sleepwalking to describe their offense on the preview pod. But the SMU game is winnable. It's a home game at Beaver Stadium. Weather could be a factor. It looks like a high of 31. It is a noon game, which stinks. I will say Notre Dame, Indiana is probably a noon game potential, but Clemson, Texas, Tennessee, Ohio State, I just don't see how Penn State doesn't get a 4 o'clock or an 8 o'clock game there.
See, for me, obviously, Indiana Notre Dame is Friday night. I think that's the way that had to go, because that's Indiana, and I liked how the regions, it kind of worked out rather well. But if you're looking at the matchups, Penn State gets that noon slot on TNT. Penn State has serious numbers as far as viewers go, as far as the following goes, whether you love them or hate them. SMU has some big oil money, and they are paying their way through the ACC, which is fun to watch. But they have a decent following as well. So, I mean, that game is at noon. Penn State, Beaver Stadium is going to be rocking. This is the last game at Beaver Stadium in its current form, which is a bittersweet moment. You've been in that press box, and we'll talk a little bit more about this after the game, but you've been in that press box as well as I have, and there's nothing quite like it for a lot of different reasons, all good, bad, and different. But yeah, I mean, Tennessee, Ohio State's the one that I'm excited to be able to watch, because that's the toss-up. That's a coin flip game. Texas, Clemson, I would expect Texas to handle Clemson, but it's a great day for the color orange. That's for sure.
What orange is the correct orange? There's 3 oranges in the college football playoff.
How worried were you about having the Kevin Quigley Bowl?
I have no rooting allegiance towards Clemson. None. So
that's fair.
No worries at all.
I wasn't sure how, I know I tweeted this before. I said that 5 and 6 were interchangeable, because to me, this is how it should have worked out. Clemson's still the number 16 team as far as rankings go, but where they're seated is that number 12 spot, which kicked Alabama out. And that's just the way it is. And there's been so much discourse about Alabama's schedule this or whatever. And their AD was saying about non-conference. Don't lose to Vanderbilt. Don't lose by 3 touchdowns to an Oklahoma team that is terrible. It is that simple.
Yeah, the out-of-conference games
non-conference schedule. Okay, don't schedule Mercer. Like, okay. Schedule somebody with a pulse. Improve your strength of schedule. Take down one less. And we mentioned this before. Go down to 8 conference championship or 8 conference games. Play an ACC or play an SEC Big Ten crossover game. Then voila. Now you have an added bonus for your strength of schedule. And it's so tough to dictate or determine the strength of schedule, because when these games are scheduled, things are much different. When the Big Ten schedule originally came out for 2025 and Oregon was still in the Pac-12, it was much, much different than what it was for Penn State. Same thing with Indiana. Indiana's schedule has been terrible. I think the combined record of their opponents has been 51 and 81. And the only team they beat with a pulse was Michigan, who, in a cruel twist of irony, get to play Alabama again in a far less greater bowl than the Rose Bowl last year. But for Penn State, they get to host a playoff game. They won 11 games. There's value in winning. Did they beat the best teams in the world? No. They came up close in their 2 losses, and that's the same deal with Texas. Texas doesn't have great wins either. Neither does Ohio State. Neither does Tennessee, really. And definitely Notre Dame doesn't. So, I mean, you look at kind of the way the cookie gets crumbled. The fact of the matter is those teams won games, and that's what matters more than anything.
Yeah, it certainly does. And I think we're shaping up for a very, very good first round. Although all of the spreads are 7.5 or greater. I think Notre Dame's the biggest one at 11. Ohio State, Tennessee is the closest at 7.5. Clemson's the 9.5. I believe Texas is an 8-point favorite. No, they're 11. Excuse me. Texas, Clemson is the largest spread. Notre Dame is only an 8-point favorite. Got those two mixed up. So, yeah, and we'll see. And this is, if you're Alabama and you're sitting at home, think about the 69th team in college basketball. It doesn't matter at what point, because they went at 64 for however long, and then they added the 14 playoff, the 14 play-in, 5-6 years ago? I don't even remember.
Mm-hmm.
But the
longer than that, but yes.
The 65th team was always crying, we should have been in.
Well, it's just like the 5th team for however many years of this playoff.
Exactly. And as you see, you're getting the meat on the bone at the end of this, at the bottom end of this 12. It's starting to get slim. Like
Miami went from potentially playing in the playoffs to playing in the Pop-Tarts Bowl.
Yeah. They went from going a first round bye to a Pop-Tart Bowl.
And we called that. We knew they weren't going to win. Now, I did take SMU to win the ACC, but they did not. But the best part about this is for Penn State and for the home teams outside of probably Ohio State, which kind of gets the short end of the stick, because Ohio State, whoever wins Ohio State, Tennessee, moves on to face Oregon. All right. And then you get, obviously, Texas and Clemson move on to play Arizona State. So Texas has a nice little bracket there.
I think Arizona State's the team to watch in this.
They are a dark horse.
Like, if I'm Texas, I don't know if I'm itching to play Arizona State. I think
no.
I like Penn State's draw better at 6, getting Boise State, than Arizona State. Arizona State scares me way more than Boise State. Now, Penn State might lose by 50 to Boise State, and I'll have to eat every bit of these words, but Boise State to me isn't as scary. They have Ashton Genty and a so-so quarterback. Like, Penn State can handle that kind of offense. Arizona State, man, they were impressive, and they have been impressive, and they are hot.
Yes,
six straight.
But now they get 3 weeks off.
Yeah.
By the time they get on the field again. So that's not easy either. Now, let's talk Indiana, Notre Dame. Winner of that game gets Georgia. Winner of SMU, Penn State gets Boise State. And if you've listened to this podcast, you know I'm a very big Boise State fan. Of course, that would be the weirdest scenario for me should Penn State end up playing Boise State, which I think that they will. I do think that Penn State should get past SMU, but a lot can happen between now and then. All right, but then you're looking at a projected bracket of Arizona State versus Texas. Let's say Ohio State versus Oregon, which gives us a rematch there in the Big Ten, which is actually an incredible quarterfinal.
I want that rematch so much. I don't think it's going to be a problem. I don't think it's going to be a problem. I think Tennessee's a little bit fake at 9. But
you're looking for Penn State. You're looking at a very strong chance to play a Georgia, Notre Dame, Indiana type in the semifinal if you can get past SMU, and get past Boise State, and to finish in the Final Four, at least of the college football playoff, would be absolutely crazy. Now, the problem that I have with all of this moving forward is that after this week, or after the quarterfinals, the first round, the days are getting weirder because you got the first round, which is all December 20th and 21st. It's a Friday. You have the Indiana Notre Dame game Friday night, SMU Penn State game. The other 3 games are on Saturday. Then it's December 31st, which is the Fiesta Bowl, which is great. That would be Penn State's game. That's what Boise State would be. And that's because they didn't want Georgia to go back to the Peach Bowl after just playing in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So Georgia gets, I think, the Sugar Bowl. Arizona State gets the Peach Bowl, and then Oregon gets the Rose Bowl. Obviously, with the Big Ten, former Pac-12 ties, that makes sense. Then you get the Cotton Bowl and the Orange Bowl for the semifinals. But these days, there's Thursday and Fridays in there. Obviously, you have the quarterfinals, and those are December 31st and January 1st, right? That's fairly normal. We all have off school or off work for first of the year, New Year's Day. But then it's the 8th and the 9th for the semifinals. And then the finals on January 20th, which is just the most bizarre scheduling ever.
Yeah, but it has to be Monday because you're butting up against NFL playoffs.
Right. And that's why it has to be Thursday and Friday, too.
Yeah. So, but I like the schedule because it's a minimum of 8 days between games. And there's some funky travel. So should Penn State beat SMU, they're traveling to Arizona. I don't think that's a short trip for Boise State either. It's the same time zone, but I don't think it's like mileage wise. It's obviously a lot farther for Penn State, but the way the map works over there, it's a little north. The north-south trip isn't as short, so it's an easier road trip, but I don't think it's a short drive for Boise State there for any sort of like home field concerns. But no, I really like it. I will, something I've been thinking of while you were talking. If Penn State beats SMU and they beat Boise State, and then they get their butt kicked by Georgia, does that invalidate those first two games? Because people will say, oh, it's SMU. Oh, it was only Boise State. And then the first time that you played a real opponent in Georgia, you got dog walked. But speaking of dog walk, I'm going to cliffhanger this because I just set myself up perfectly. Dog walking, we're brought to you by Good Dog Beverage Company. So this episode is brought to you by Good Dog Beverage. Good Dog offers a variety of products, including vodka and whiskey cocktails, along with bourbon hard seltzers. Through Good Dogs leverage the beverage program, they donate a portion of the profits for every case sold and 100% of the merchandise sales profits to provide service dogs for people in need. You can go to gooddogbeverage.com. That's good, DOGG beverage.com to find merchandise and the closest retailer carrying Good Dog beverages to you.
I don't know. And that's so tough because this is a very big stretch of games for legacy for James Franklin. Like, these are games that he must win, right? And he'll be favored in both the first round and the quarterfinal for sure. Depending on who they play in that semifinal, I don't know that he ends up being the favorite. You know how he goes when he's not the favorite, right? But this is a perfect opportunity to really throttle those expectations and throttle really, that good, great elite, right? It's finally beating teams that you're not supposed to beat or that you need to beat. If they could get past the semifinal, then they've won the big game. But these are all big games now because they're survive in advance, right? I mean, it's not the typical bowl season where no matter what, you're done.
Yep.
You have to win and move on. Now, is there a validation because it's SMU? They played in their conference championship game. So did Boise State. Boise State won the Mountain West. Granted, they are different brands compared to the Ohio States, the Tennessees, the other teams in this playoffs, but they're still there. Regardless.
My problem is I don't
think such a tough spot, but he cannot lose to either of those teams.
I don't think the fan base is happy if they just get past SMU and Boise State. I don't think the fan base is happy. The fan base was calling for his head yesterday, and it's not like he coached a bad game. The second and one call, let's just go back to it. The second one call, everyone takes a shot there. It's probably on Drew Aller to not throw that ball in double coverage.
He's got to throw it in a spot where they can't get to it. But that cornerback, or that safety, I think it was, made an excellent play on that ball.
Hell of a play. But and everyone's saying run it. They're at the 40-yard line or right at midfield with 2 minutes to go. If you run it, you're burning a guaranteed 20, 30 seconds off the clock, and you only have two timeouts because you wasted one on the drive before. I don't think anything bad coaching-wise was there besides from Tom Allen's defense not being prepared. But the offense was fully capable. James is an offensive guy. He's riding with Andy Kotelnicki on this one. I just don't think the fan base is going to bring it back. The fan base was basically calling for his head yesterday for no reason. I don't understand it. It's social media's been in a dumpster fire the last day and a half. Well, from about 8:15 p.m. last, or I guess game kicked off at 8:17. So from about 8:25 p.m. last night until right now, and I'm sure it's still a shitstorm. It's nothing but calling for James Franklin's head, and beating SMU, I don't think satisfies them. Beating Boise State, I don't think satisfies them. You have to beat an SEC team of which you are probably not going to be favored against. Because let's say Notre Dame beats Indiana, Georgia handles Notre Dame, makes it to the semifinals. I don't know if they're going to be favored against Georgia. The problem Georgia has, though, is what is Carson Beck's status? That was a nasty injury.
It didn't look good. And then the backup got knocked out, too.
Backup got knocked out for
wasn't targeting.
I don't know how that wasn't targeting. But if it's any sort of rotator cuff, labrum, bicep issue.
Or elbow, like it could be.
Which is,
awful.
I thought it was kind of like up in the shoulder area. If it's any sort of that game's either January 9th or January 10th. That's 1 month. I don't know if he's healthy. And if you're Georgia and it's a backup quarterback who looked better, the offense ran better with it, but it's like, oh, well, you lost to Georgia and their backup quarterback.
Yeah, Georgia is beatable. They are definitely beatable.
They certainly
100%.
are.
But a couple of wins here, rattle off 3 wins, and the monkey is off the back.
I agree. I think 2 wins in a close game in the semifinals it satisfies me. They must win 2, though.
They have to get to the semis.
Must win 2.
And it's going to be very weird for me, 100%, when they play Boise State. My beloved Broncos.
I think you'll survive.
I will too. And my hope is that I can get to Arizona and Phoenix.
It'd be a hell of a trip.
It would be. But the problem is that you can't drive it.
You could. There are roads that go out there.
Yes, there are plenty of roads that go out there. However, I don't want to waste 2 days driving to Arizona and flights at this time of year. And this is a problem too. Flights this time of year are not good price-wise. So, I mean, the Big Ten Championship was probably one of the better attended conference championship games because it's a drivable location for Penn State people in the Midwest and in central Pennsylvania. It's only 7 hours from Altoona, which is 45 minutes away from Penn State. So that is drivable, right? Now, Oregon, probably not so much, but there are still quite a few Ducks fans scattered throughout the stadium, and it was a really cool atmosphere. But you looked at the SEC title game, you looked at the Big 12 championship game, and you looked at, and I didn't get a chance to see much, if at all, any of the ACC championship game, but those conference championship games are now going to be sparsely attended because of the potential of more games going on for all of these teams. And that's the danger that they run into with all of this extra football.
Yeah, it certainly is. Sorry, I'm looking up what are flights to Phoenix. Round trip from Richmond, 30th to the 1st are right at $800.
Yeah.
You could do it mid 6s to mid 7s, but right at $800. So yeah, I don't think now that you know the Big Ten title game, as long as you make it, you're in. As long as you were in the week before. Well, you're not. You're going to know that because by the time you're booking your travel, you already know where the playoff rankings are kind of going to shake out. So you can make an educated decision on whether or not your team is going to make it or not. I think you're spot on, and especially if you're Oregon, like that's a long flight. And India is not a big airport, and it is terribly expensive to get to. I think it was $700 for me to fly from Richmond to Indy, which is the same price as we just mentioned from Richmond to Phoenix.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's no end in sight for all of that. But
I love it.
Good news for Penn State.
So much college football. Give me more.
Yes, this has been a great year. And we're going to talk a little bit more about college football as a whole when we come back for the third and final segment of the Lashing Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. Welcome back to the third and final segment of the Lashing Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. I'm Jared. He's Kevin. Before we went live, Kevin asked me what we were talking about, and I'd like to throw him a little cliffhanger because he left me hanging before. And you mentioned calling for coaches' heads, right? I have a problem with this now. Listen, I have coached multiple sports, football, basketball, baseball for multiple years. I do radio stuff. I do all kinds of different stuff in the industry. The fact of people live and die every single play. Like Penn State goes down early in the game. Are those Andy Kotelnicki's fault? No. A lot of it is execution. That 2-point conversion, honestly, was a really well-designed 2-point conversion. However, Tyler Warren slips, and Oregon just made a play.
And the defense was waiting for Drew Aller in the end zone. They had a guy right in the flat, standing 3 yards deep in the end zone. Like, it's not successful even if they pull it off.
So can you judge why you call certain plays certain times? Yes. But it's not always the coach's fault. It's not James Franklin's fault. Listen, yes, James Franklin has a terrible record against these teams. That is not up for debate. That is real. That is factual. That is a statistical thing. But it's not always his fault they lose these games. A play here, a play there. It's those sorts of things. Now, I am not trying to be a James Franklin apologist. I think that he's coaching some of his best football lately over the last 3 weeks. But Tom Allen, people are giving Tom Allen crap for giving up 45 points. He's not the one that's getting sucked in on a pass play, or like Dom DeLuca gets sucked in on one of the outside runs. So, I mean, he's not the one that's playing out of position. They're calling the defense that they think is going to be the right one, but ultimately they bite and it doesn't always work.
My problem with it is the over pursuit is constant. It's been a constant problem this season, and nothing has been done to correct it. And the problem is with Tom Allen, though, is he has the impossible job of following Manny Diaz. The impossible job.
And I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, I don't think anything changes for Manny Diaz in that game yesterday.
I don't know either. Although I feel like the defense was more disciplined under Manny Diaz. I don't think the pressure difference. Tom Allen's a little bit more conservative on pressure. And maybe he had a couple bad play calls, I would say. The spy down late in the game, they rush 3. Nobody picks up the back coming out of the backfield, and instead Abdul Carter standing right at the line of scrimmage spying Gabriel. Maybe we should pick up the running back. That's not a knock on Abdul Carter. It's just a complete lack of assignment there. Tez Johnson, I mean, he had a game, but like a lot of the stuff was quick. But
that's been their kryptonite all year. The quick slant, and that's been every team's MO against Penn State. Is get the ball out quick. And again, no team has moved as quick as Oregon has. Like that, and they're not going to see that the rest of the way either.
And I will say, like, the defense did have to come out fast and in an over pursuit manner because they almost gave Oregon's speed too much respect. Because then they quickly found out that they could run with Oregon. And I think the defense, I don't think you play well when you give up 45 points, 7 of those being on a 1-yard possession as a result of the offense's mistake. I don't know. I tackling was abysmal last night. That's not a Tom Allen problem. The goal line stuff, though, is only balls on the 3. They run trips out wide. Like, you get beat early. You need to do a 3-man press or one person inside one person near the line of scrimmage, 2 guys on the goal line. They're going to do some sort of crisscross. You need to have a bracket coverage there. I'm the outside defender. I'm taking the outside guy. I'm the middle defender. I'm taking whoever goes middle. And if I'm the inside guy, I take whoever goes inside. Brackets work, especially in zone coverage, or especially in man coverage. Brackets can work because you're passing off guy for guy. And if this guy breaks in, both of them aren't breaking it, because then they're running the same route because they started from such a tight formation. If this guy breaks out, no one else is breaking out because, again, they're running the same route. The space is limited in the end zone. I think that's where you can get that technical defense installed, and they just haven't done it. And instead, they get burnt by the rub route right there on the goal line. And it was too easy. I mean, the writing's on the wall at this point in time. They're at the 3-yard line, but like, guys making some effort. It was easy touchdowns. And I think that was 3rd and goal too. 3rd and goal from the 3. If it's an incomplete pass, do they go for it on 4th and goal? Can you force a field goal? I think just that little next step is something that Tom Allen doesn't possess that Manny Diaz maybe did. But also it's kind of a grass is greener scenario. Like, I'm just romanticizing last year's defense. I don't know if last year's defense does anything different. Also, I mean, KJ Winston.
Right. And I think the other thing too is, it was fun to see the chess match between the Oregon offense and the Penn State offense. They were fun to watch, and Drew Aller played a spectacular football game. But like I said, my problem is we give all the problems to the coaches, and it's not always the coaches. I mean, there's the fact of the matter is, it wasn't the referees, it wasn't James Franklin, it wasn't this, it wasn't that. It was the fact that Penn State did not execute as much as Oregon did. And when Oregon executed, it was damn near flawless. And they played a perfect game. Penn State didn't play a perfect game and was still in the game. And that's why I think Penn State has a really, really good chance to make a run here.
Yeah, I think they do. I think they're poised. I think from a barometer perspective, this is what they needed. They needed to show that they can compete. They needed national validation for media because, again, media has been slanted and awful. Penn State hasn't played anybody. I mean, I'm a fan too. I'm going to listen to all that stuff. I'm going to scroll Twitter. It's been kind of insulting because it's definitely just a lot of box score watchers, a lot of just not even box score watchers. It's just a lot of final score watchers and then critiquing games based on it from there. National validation, shot themselves in the foot, never gave themselves a chance to win. And unfortunately, kind of how I saw the game going. I think I mentioned in the pregame pod, I saw Penn State going down. There was a scenario where Penn State goes down 2 possessions early. They go down 17 or 18 points, which is actually 3 possessions. And we're never able to fully recover. Their final score was obviously 8 points instead of 3, and they scored way more points than that. But I'm 2 games better than you on our picks from this weekend.
Yeah, I had SMU winning, and I had Penn State winning.
And
there was another one, Tulane,
Georgia. So I was 3. Yeah, I was 2 games better than you. I picked Georgia begrudgingly, but I'm going to take credit for it. Ball knowledge there.
Yeah.
And then I picked Oregon. But you and I whiffed on Tulane.
Yes.
Whiffed.
Yeah, and I should have looked at it a little deeper. We all thought Army was fake, but Tulane was also fake.
The cold weather played more of a factor,
yes.
and Army's offense is the real deal. And Tulane's defense is not built for a real deal.
And their coach is dealing with rumors about the North Carolina job, which is also rumored for Bill Belichick too, which is really bizarre.
Did you see the rumored clause for Bill Belichick?
Yes, which is also weird. But yes, nepotism is American pastime.
If you're not familiar, there's a rumor going around that Bill Belichick has a clause to take the UNC job, which would name Steven Belichick, his son, currently DC at Washington, I believe, to be named the head coach in waiting at UNC. So interesting to say the least. Any other thoughts from the other games this weekend?
No, I the only game that I got to see was the tail end of Boise State and UNLV, and then I obviously was at Lucas Oil Stadium for the Big Ten Championship. So I didn't get to see a lot of football. I saw a little bit of the Georgia game because it was on in the TVs and the press box before the game, but that was really about it.
I got to go mea culpa to my alma mater in Clemson. That's on me. I think I was more down on Clemson than you were. I was basing it off the South Carolina game in which their offense looked terrible, but South Carolina's got a real defense. SMU doesn't. So if Clemson,
that was the chaos that we said. And we said if there was any chaos, it would be Clemson, and it was. They kicked Alabama out of the playoff, which is great. And
I think I said I
it.
was half rooting for Clemson just to get the chaos that
Yes.
Clemson jumps in over Alabama, which we got. So, but if Clemson's offense can put up 34 points, granted on a 56-yard walk-off field goal, I think Penn State's offense is very capable. But just to and their quarterback's got a nice name, Kevin. He's got a good name. All right. Just some housekeeping. We probably won't have an episode until the pregame for SMU.
This game. Yes.
I don't think there's a reason. So look for that on
we will be
December 19th.
It is time to take it. It's time to take a bye.
Yeah.
Time to take a bye.
I got to grade final projects, final reports, final presentations, and my final for my classes on December 16th. I got to get grades turned around by the 18th. So I'm going to have a busy week coming up.
Monday night, I have 2 basketball games that we're doing radio for. I've got a final project to turn in for my grad class, and then some more work all over the place. But yeah, so we're taking off the rest of the week. We'll be back again next week to preview SMU in the college football playoff first round at Beaver Stadium, noon kickoff, December 21st. For Kevin Quigley, this has been Jared Pergar on the Lashing Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network.